Let me start with a question. If it all ended tomorrow, if today was your last day on earth, would you have the assurance that things are in order? Would you feel that all of your relationships were where they need to be? Would your affairs be in order for your family? Would things be taken care of the way you need them to? Now, I know that's deep for a conference on marketing, but I've been teaching this lesson on trust and the trust transformation for more than 15 years now. And it's only been in the last year and a half that I've had to ask and answer that question. You see, facing your mortality puts things in perspective like nothing else can. It was May 25th, 2019, Friday night, Memorial Day weekend. My wife and I were at home enjoying a movie, hanging out. She went to bed, and I thought I would soldier on and stay up and watch the end of the movie. And of course, as is normally the case, I fell asleep on the couch. About 2 a.m., I woke up with the worst pain I'd ever felt. It was as if somebody was punching a hole through my chest. I ran in the bedroom and I said, "Kim, I need you to get your shoes on and take me to the emergency room. I'm having a heart attack." We jump in the car. We head to Advent Health, Altamont Springs, the closest hospital, which is about 15 minutes away. On the way, I stroke out. I become completely non-responsive. She gets to the hospital, has to drag me out of the car, and the team immediately begins to work. One of the nurses pipes in, "Hey, let's stop the chest pain protocols and run him back for a CT scan. I think it's an aortic dissection." And thank God he did. They put me in the CT scanner and confirmed exactly that. I was having an aortic dissection. And if you're not familiar with the aortic dissection, it's essentially where the aorta, which is the largest vessel that runs through the heart, begins to split. In my case, it was splitting from the carotid arteries here all the way through the root of the aorta here. It was serious, perhaps the most serious of the conditions. So they called for an air care team to take me to the tertiary care hospital in downtown Orlando. Before the helicopter arrived, the doctor looked at my wife and said, "I think you need to bring the kids back and say goodbye. We're not sure he's even going to make it down there for surgery." It was 6 hours of surgery. It was 6 days in an induced coma because they were concerned that oxygen had not gotten to my organs enough and that permanent damage was definite. In fact, the prevailing comment that was going through Advent Health, where I work, by the way, was that there was no prognosis for a positive outcome. I was likely going to die in surgery. And if I made it out, I would likely die in recovery. And if I happen to make it through recovery, I would have permanent damage that would require a caretaker and no quality of life. And that's not what happened. I spent another 20 days in the hospital after I woke up from the coma on day 6. I had a month of in-home care treatment with occupational therapists and nurses. I did 6 weeks of cardiac rehab and ended up being out of work for 6 months in recovery. I returned to work in November of 2019 and then had a follow-up surgery to repair an aneurysm that happened as a result of the aortic dissection in February of 2020, only to walk in to COVID-19 and for our entire healthcare system to lock down into creating a command center to manage the crisis, where we've been ever since, which is why we're doing this remotely. And I share that story because it's important in the sense of understanding how relationships are. The most important thing for me in that entire recovery were the relationships I had, first and foremost with my family, then with those who were providing care to me, Then to those that I work with, our friends, and everybody else in the system had to operate at the highest level of trust to ensure my survival. And now, as we're going through this pandemic, as we're all experiencing things in the world, whether it's social unrest or otherwise, trust as a currency has never been more valuable. And you define trust in a number of different ways. The primary definition for trust is the assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, or truth in someone or something. In healthcare, we look at trust in terms of professionalism. And it's Dr. Joe Shapiro who said, professionalism is any intent, action, or words that foster trustworthy relationships. I mentioned before, business is selling trust like it never has. Here's a slide that illustrates how Accenture, the business consulting firm, looks at trust. And they go on to say that in the not too distant past, trust was seen as a soft topic, but no more. Nothing could be more hardwired in to our system and to what people want more than trust. As marketers, as communicators, as people in the business of putting information out there, our ultimate aim in everything we do is to earn trust. It needs to be the first and primary filter. That being said, I want to make sure that what I'm giving you and what you understand through this presentation and program is that trust is so much more. It is the essence of our relationships. It is what we need to aspire to in all the relationships that we have. It begins from within and it touches every point in our lives. Let me share a story. It was, ironically enough, Memorial Day weekend 2007. I had just gotten home from work. It was a pretty important weekend for me because it was actually a weekend where I was going to spend time preparing for my first keynote address on this topic. I had worked really hard to put everything together. I had everything ready to go. I was going to talk to a room full of public relations professionals about trust in this new format, in this construct that I had put together. As I walk in the front door, my daughter, who at the time was 5, maybe 6 years old, runs up to me and is so proud because, well, I need to go back and explain. As I walked in the front door, I looked off to the left in our dining room, which had been turned into a bracelet factory. And for any of you that are parents, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Beads everywhere, on the table, on the floor. It's really an OSHA violation. And those beads don't feel too good when you step on them. But Faith was so proud, she ran up and she had made a bracelet for me and said, "Daddy, would you wear it?" And of course I said, absolutely. Now, being a long holiday weekend, everywhere we went, I was show and tell. Faith would drag me by the arm and tell people about the bracelet that she had made for her father. Well, Monday comes around and I get ready to go to work, put the suit on. I had meetings that day. And so I got in the car, didn't give it a second thought. I had left the bracelet on my dresser and headed off to work. I got home that night. I walk in the front door. I head to the kitchen. I'm helping Kim make dinner. My daughter walks up to me and she has another bracelet in her hand. And all I could think is, "Honey, I only have so much arm to give to your cause." And she says to me, "Daddy, if you didn't like the other bracelet, will you wear this one?" You see, she had seen the bracelet sitting on top of my dresser. And in her mind, I had made a commitment. When she asked if I wear the bracelet, she heard me say, "Absolutely." And then all of a sudden, I'm not wearing it. So in her mind, the only reason she could come up with why Daddy wasn't wearing the bracelet is that he must not like it. So I put it back on and I wear it every day. In fact, I have it on right here. And I wear it every day for 2 reasons. And it really emphasizes the first aspect of the trust transformation. Number 1, because I told her I would. And number 2, it reminds me when I look down and see it that every little thing that I say or do is either contributing to or taking away from the trust that others are going to have in me. And so trust, while often thought of as this large, sweeping idea, is really a whole lot of little things and a whole lot of smaller things that we can manage effectively day in and day out, be mindful of day in and day out. And the first key in walking away and understanding this is to understand that we need to be humble enough to be vulnerable and available to people with our trust. And so understanding that humility is critical in being a first step to taking the trust transformation. Now, the other thing that's important to understand is I'm not Pollyanna. That relationships are always going to be in flux, and not every relationship will work out. And some of them are toxic and we need to get away from them. In fact, normally we're going to have about 4 different kinds of relationships in our lives. We're going to have people around us who are allies, people that generally are inclined to want to follow or like or hang out with us. We'll have others in our relationships that are advocates for who we are, that step out and get ahead of things for us, that are always there, the closest, tightest relationships that we have. Then some in our lives are going to be agnostic. They're not going to necessarily engage with us, likely because they don't know us. And maybe there's not a reason for them to engage. That may be the largest group of people in our lives. And then lastly, we are going to have adversaries in our lives. We're going to have people who compete with us, who are on the other side of an issue from us, that we don't get along with, that trust was broken with, and we have to accept that. And by accepting that we're going to have these different kinds of relationships, we can look at trust in a little bit different way, with a bit of a detachment that says, I'm willing to understand that relationships are going to be in different places, so that I'm willing to be and take the initiative to ensure those relationships that need to be in better shape, I'm going to take ownership for, and I'm going to take that step. So as we look at trust as an idea, trust really has 2 driving concepts. The first driver is an emotion in terms of the way we want to trust people, that first impression we have, that initial engagement we have. We don't have a lot of data, but those emotions really begin to connect with people. Then on the other side of that equation are experiences that we have with people. And if you look at this picture, it begins to tie together where the emotion and the experience meet up. There are 4 attributes that really contribute to the level of trust that people are going to have in us. And so attribute number 1 is to be trustworthy. And that really lies at the intersection of where emotion and experience meet up. It's also the one that we have to begin with, because trustworthiness starts from inside. As you move up the emotion axis, there's authenticity. Authenticity is that connection that we make with other individuals. It's the trust that we really begin to cultivate in our personal, friend, and close working relationships with people. Along the experience axis is the idea of dependability. It's that idea that you are giving a consistent, reliable performance on a regular basis. And then up in the upper right is the idea of influence. Influence is a little bit different than the first 3. The first 3 really contribute to a foundational trust, and then influence is earned in that, and it's what you do with the trust that people give you. It's the stewardship of it. And so as we think about those attributes, which I'll unpack for you in just a minute, they're really inspired, and they're really driven on 4 guiding principles. And these guiding principles create questions for us to ask of ourselves in terms of what we're doing to ensure that we're fostering, cultivating, building, repairing, and restoring trust in the relationships we have. So question number 1, or the first of the 4 guiding principles, is, am I building trust from the inside out? Am I first accountable to myself for these ideas, for these principles and behaviors that I'm looking for in building trusting relationships, before assigning them to other people? Second, am I taking responsibility for the relationships? The other thing that happens when we own it is other people notice that. They notice that you're not just casting it away and that you take it for granted. So again, take responsibility for the relationship. Number 3 is keep your promises and communicate consistently. Or as a question, am I keeping my promises and communicating consistently? And it gives people the perspective of managing the outcomes, managing the expectations that they have. And then finally, we want to know if we're being a good steward of the trust that we're given. What are you doing with it? How are you treating this gift that people have given you? What are you doing with that trust to make a difference in people's lives? So the first of the 4 attributes that I want to unpack a little bit is being trustworthy. It's important to point out that trustworthy is different than trusted. Our aim here is to become trusted. Trustworthy is essentially congratulations, you've earned the right to be trusted. And it begins with trusting ourselves, having an assurance in ourselves and what we're doing, living consistently to a certain set of standards that we know others want to hold us accountable to and that we want others to be accountable for. So there's 8 principles within trustworthiness that are important to understand. First and foremost, it's integrity. Integrity is the beginning of it, and I think the best definition of integrity is doing the right thing when no one's looking. Having that consistent adherence to a code of ethics, to an idea that keeps us on that straight and narrow path. The second is attitude. And you may say, well, integrity and attitude seem to be on opposite ends, and yet attitude's the first thing people see in us. It's the first impression we make with folks. And the next time you question attitude, think about writing the tip out on a check at the end of a meal. How much of that relates to the engagement and the idea and the attitude that server brings to the table? Next is focus. Are we focused on the right things right now? Or do we have the priorities in order that we need to with regard to the people that we're serving and with regard to our own lives? I can tell you, coming out of the crisis that I did, there is a far different focus on many of the health indicators that I was not paying attention to. There's a far different focus on some of the family issues that, quite frankly, I was messing up and only came to realize in the moment of crisis that I was confronted with. There's a different focus on the work that I do now and how I do that work. And not that you have to go through that crisis to experience that, but one of the things that people look at and engage trustworthiness on, are you focused on what's most important to me as your client, as your consumer, as your friend, as your family? And then there's initiative. Are you getting things done? Are you taking the initiative to do things? Followed by insight. Are you a lifelong learner? Are you there helping and mentoring people through the process? Are you the person they call on for the answer for the things that you're responsible to? And then perseverance. Are you willing to be there when times get tough? Or do you just cut and run? People want to know that you're not just a fair weather friend. Excellence. Do you do your best work first? People look for that. They want to make sure that that's what they're getting. And then finally, people who are trustworthy have a vision for something bigger than themselves. It's not all about me. It's about the things that I'm here to do. It could be your calling. It could be the thing that your ministry, your outreach, the things that are important and that have to get done. The second attribute is authenticity. And there's a recipe for authenticity. People who are authentic are those real engaged people, that person that just seems to consistently show up and be there. Authentic people have a clarity of purpose. They understand what they're doing. They're not wishy-washy and constantly shifting either their intentions, their motives, or what it is they're trying to do. Then that's not to say you can't reinvent yourself and go do something different, but you need to have the clarity of purpose in the relationship. You need to have clarity of purpose in what you're trying to achieve. They're present. They exercise presence in relationships. We live in a time where it's so easy to become disconnected through electronics, to rely on social media, to rely on text messaging or emails, and not sit with somebody and be there with them, not be engaged with them. I know at the office now we have an extra measure of rounding that we do with our team members, because on a consistent basis, people are working so much more in a remote environment. And we do have to rely on electronic engagement, be it Microsoft Teams or Zoom or others. So we've got to be intentional about how that presence has something to do with much more than just showing up. So as an example, Dr. Omira Mansfield, who co-wrote this program with me, we spend an hour every 3 weeks with the nurses and frontline employees that went through the Trust Transformation Program and have experienced this lesson. And we're just there to check in with them, to let them have a place to talk about the things that they're struggling with during the pandemic, maybe what the unit's like, maybe what their family issues are like, perhaps how they're contending and dealing with things, and then create the community around it that they can all share and be a part of. That presence is so important, especially now. Then there's respect. Authentic people offer respect. You don't have to like everybody, but you do need to give them respect. And what that means at the end of the day is you can argue and disagree and have all kinds of things that go on, and yet you can always let somebody leave with their dignity. You don't have to go low on them. And so respect always gets you invited back to the conversation. Next is candor. Relationships without candor are weak at best and damaging in their worst case. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about candor in just a moment, but Jim Collins in his book Good to Great talks about the fact that candor is such a valuable element within any organization, and that great organizations really lean into candor. I work for a CEO that demands it. There's never a meeting where he isn't asking for that feedback and letting us be at risk. This is part of that vulnerability that we talked about, where you are willing to let people speak truth into your lives to help ensure that you're creating those authentic relationships. And then there's forgiveness. If you're going to have candor in a relationship, you better be ready for forgiveness. And the key with forgiveness here is really more about you. I want to make sure that you walk away understanding that what I'm asking you to consider is that forgiveness is something you do for yourself. And I'll let that settle in for just a little bit, because a lot of times people see forgiveness, well, I'm not gonna let them off that easy. I'm not gonna forget this. Well, it's not them. And you need to constantly be able to put those things in balance and ensure that those things are happening. A little bit about candor before we move on. What you'll see on the screen is what's called the Johari window. And what you see here is you look at the different access of what's known to you versus what's known to others. And so as you look at the upper left-hand quadrant, what's known to yourself and what's known to others, that's really the public self or the arena. I think of this as Google. Type into Google someone's name, and what pops up is what everyone knows about them. And then if you go down to the lower left-hand corner, what's known to you but not known to others, that's the facade, if you will. That's the things that you know about yourself. It's the secret self, if you will, the things that you don't need to share with everybody. They may not need to know about. And then as you go to the top right-hand corner, what's not known to you but what's known to others is your blind spot. And this is where I want to park for just a minute, because we all have blind spots. And we all need to acknowledge that we have blind spots. And if we're going to have authentic relationships, this is where candor comes in most important. The third attribute's dependability. And this coincides with the idea that, are we communicating consistently and are we managing expectations? So people who are dependable engage fully in the relationship. They deliver results, and if they're going to miss a deadline, they communicate about it. They give a consistent, reliable performance, and they evaluate every interaction that they had. How could it have been better? What could I have done differently? How can I improve the relationship? And then finally, we want to be a good steward of our trust, and that's where we get into influence. And are we being influential? And influential people do 5 things really well. First of all, they choose to engage. They make a choice. One choice might be not to engage, the other choice to be engaged, but they're decisive in that choice. Second, they make a public commitment, or they make a commitment of accountability to what it is they're going to do, and they let people hold them accountable to those commitments. They confront the difficult questions. They ask the good, the bad, and the ugly to make sure that they're accounting for the things that they may need. And if they're exercising the humility we talked about earlier, it opens them up when they ask those questions to seek the competence. And that may come from other people helping and supporting them out. And ultimately, they have the courage to finish. And so as we think about being a good steward of our relationships, there's the stewardship of using the trust appropriately that we're given. And then there's the stewardship of exercising accountability in the relationships and in the other people that we have relationships with, holding them to the same standard. This is where we can remove toxic relationships when people consistently show up and aren't demonstrating the attributes of being trusted and trustworthy. So I want to leave you with this. I want you to take action now. I want you to do something that will ultimately have long-lasting benefits in your relationship. I want you to think about 3 people in your lives. Somebody who is an advocate, somebody who is maybe an ally or agnostic, and somebody who is an adversary, but you need to build a relationship with. And I want you to be intentional about taking responsibility for those 3 relationships. Maybe the advocate is a good friend that you just need to continue to build time with and build opportunities. The ally may be a new employee, maybe someone new in your life that you've just come to get to know. The adversary may be someone you work with that just all the time, it's this frustrating cycle with them. They always just seem to be on the other side. I want you to reach out to them, engage with them, and ask these questions. What are the trustworthy behaviors that you need to ensure happening to either improve, build, or restore those relationships? What things should you avoid to continue to build, restore, and foster those relationships? And then lastly, how will I know trust is flourishing in all 3 of those relationships? So an advocate, an ally, agnostic, an adversary, take time, make a commitment, get engaged, and make a difference in those relationships. I want to just come back to the thing I started off with. There are times in our lives where we have to confront the ultimate questions in our lives. There are always times in our lives where we are confronting day to day the things that we're doing to either earn trust or break trust. And each day we need to be able to show up and answer the question that I am doing the things that are cultivating, building, earning, restoring, and repairing the trust that I have with people in my lives. Thank you.